I'm going to start initially about the app, the wrap. Let me say at the outset that the app is not ready for activation. There's no point in emailing looking for the app straight away. The app, when you download it, doesn't immediately mean that you're then to become a responder, which a lot of people think is the way it works. You must apply to the National Ambulance Service as a responder and go through the whole system of being activated and put on the system. But we have been trialling and doing a lot of work on it for the last while. But you can download the app and use demo as the username and password to play around with it in the meantime, and your feedback is very much appreciated. It was really, really great to see it on some of the slides and some of the mentioned earlier by Martin Dunn and Cathal O'Donnell, so hopefully it will be embraced as it goes forward. The app can be used by, in essence, any responder. It will be the plan as it goes forward. What I'm going to do is do a quick history. About 3 years ago when we started out, the concept being at the time we didn't have any way of really recording the response times of the responders. That said, in that time, the Wicklow and the Dublin Control Centre did actually have some of that ability then. We didn't have it here in the Midlands, and that's what drove the idea of the app. But what this does in addition to that is it would allow the responder schemes to have access to that information via a website. So at their annual AGMs and at their meetings, they can go back and look at the calls, all unidentifiable in regards to patient information, but their times, their response times, and hopefully that can be used for motivation of the rest of the groups. The initial version was very much an online link, and a lot of apps out there, and there's people talking to myself and Bridget on a weekly basis about developing apps. Apps are really easy to develop. Stick up a website, connect it down, and that's the job done. Not like this. It must be linked, it must be integrated, and that's why we are slower than we had anticipated. The original version 1 needed a lot of web access. It had no push version, which means notification, and it had a manual input, and it had no mapping. Version 2 then added the possibility of push, where you would get a notification driven through the phone, and we could make it do certain tones depending on the certain types of phones. It had the option for mapping. The difficulty with that is at the moment, as we all know, our biggest problem is the caller doesn't know where they are or can't give those good directions. So it's still a problem. The map in essence is useless until the control centre knows where the caller is. So again, a lot of this will be driven, as I said earlier, we're on the countdown to 3, 2, 1. When the control centre hopefully goes and we have rocket launch, hopefully a lot of this will click into place. So we want to have all the background work done in advance. It does have a text backup system, so again it can be utilised, and if we don't have coverage it can still be utilised. Its limitations was there is still some web linking needed. In other words, if you don't have any links, well then it won't fully function. You won't be able to use mapping because it's driven from the internet. But it still has some, its key features can still be utilised. And as I said, at this particular point the mapping is unhelpful. With a lot of our work recently with the Wicklow responders, 4 groups in Wicklow, and I'd like to thank them publicly again, Arklow, Blessington, Greystones and Carnew for helping us out and really testing it and twisting it and testing me, and I'm testing them, and lots of calls back and forward, but we do appreciate every bit of information we have. So we looked at we needed to reduce the web linking, and we have done that. So the app works pretty much more independently than it did before. If you're utilising push, it needs to get an internet connection to do that. But once that is done, then it can be used even if the internet connection is not good. It does have a text backup, so linking in with the control centre, so we don't change any of the current systems, and I will always need that, I would imagine. Okay, that's I need to move on to the next part. I'll turn it off now.
You designed the wrap, is it?
Yeah. I didn't assign the timing. We also added the eCFO report, so the CFO report can be done on the app itself and sent on. The limitations, very little amount of web access needed now at this stage, but it can be used in manual mode. So even if you don't have the internet, you can still utilise it. You can put in the code from the control centre, and it does save a lot of the pushing buttons that the guys who are actively responding at the moment put in certain codes for certain calls. It would get rid of all of that in essence. So the benefits are that it basically is going to record response times. It's very easy to use. It's one of our main points about it. It don't need numbers to be pushing in and out then if we get it fully integrated. And that's where we need to be now at this stage, integrated. With thanks then to FEC for sponsoring and pushing and really pushing hard on it. ATSR, the company that's developed it, and the Wicklow responders for their feedback. And I suppose their feedback really has been a great design. It's been very simple to use. It is practical, little or no training needed for it, but it's not perfect, and we know that, and we're still working on that. My next briefing is just to look at some of the work I've been doing the last 2 years in regards to the possibility and the feasibility of a national defib register. And it's been chaired by a steering group of the Irish Heart Foundation, FEC, the Irish National Ambulance Service, and the HSE. And I suppose what I'm proposing is how it should work, not how it will work, and it's probably the utopian version. So initially we looked at the stakeholders and what they had to, what did they need out of a national defib register. So the National Ambulance Service needed the location and directions to the machine, whether or not it was available and whether it was ready to be used. The owners would probably want a reminder service so that they remember to check the machine, check the pads, the dates, and generally ongoing reminders of maintenance and maybe possibly weather reminders and checking the machines on a regular basis that way. Also then, if they needed to find out more about the machines, they could link straight back into the register and find out more about their own particular machines, user manuals and the likes of that. Suppliers want to know where the location of them are and basically who currently owns them, as some of them are handed on. And when there is a recall, and I don't mean that it's not obviously a bad word, but when there's an advisory to do an update, that it can be done much more efficiently. If we know that there's 10 of them in one particular area, we go in and we do a swoop and they're done, and we know which ones are done and which ones are not done. For the responders, I suppose, it's the location of a public access. So if you're somewhere like Tullamore today and you happen to get a call, you're not familiar with the area, it may then be able to show you where the nearest AED is. However, I don't see the app nor apps being utilised in a cardiac arrest for the location of an AED. What it really needs to do is that the ambulance service know where it is, and someone, the only thing that's guaranteed in all of these is at some point someone will make the phone call. Now when I came down here 15 years ago, it was usually after the priest and after the doctor, and it was usually 4 hours after the patient. But we've moved on from there. So it's not necessarily public. It's needed, the register is needed for advocacy, data, information. We don't know how many defibrillators are out there. We don't know where they are. We don't know if they're in the right place. So I suppose not as much how it should work, but how it may work for us. It should be an online registration, a list basically, a database, given the locations of the defibrillator when it's registered. Sorry, did I skip on? How it should be, so what it should, the different elements of it should be basically an online web page. It should have a registration system. From that then it would have, I would suggest, and I use my defib page. So after a group or a company or someone for the first time has used their defibrillator, they could go back in. There would automatically be links there to advise either the suppliers or some of their coordinators that they've used the defibrillator. And therefore they get additional information they wouldn't normally have. It would also help with maintenance checks, and hopefully we'd have some good news stories, because there's lots of them out there. You know, there's 5 saves every week going by the current data, which we don't hear about, and it's difficult to get that information out. And just because someone is saved in Cork, I always get the hair standing up at the back of my neck. Doesn't matter where it is in the country. I believe every one of us in the room has had an effect on that, otherwise we wouldn't be here. So it should work with an online registration, an online database, and I say limited access. Certain people would have access to that database. I have a query over public access mapping. In other words, I wouldn't see it where everybody can log in and check out where all the defibrillators are in the country. But if your group wishes to make that available, they can do. But it's not essential that they be there available to everybody. It's essential to be there to the ambulance service. The information could be downloaded by the National Ambulance Control Centre either live, where they link in with this database, or where they download that information on a daily basis. The register would only be live for 3 to 6 months thereabouts. And what would be required then is that everyone who has registered a defibrillator, they would actually become, in essence, they would go ghost, as I would call it. They would disappear off the system until they re-registered. Now, it's not a full re-registering. What it is, someone to say, the defib is in good condition, it's ready for use, the pads are in date, and once they've done that, it then becomes available again. Putting the onus back on the responder or the owner to make sure this machine is in good working order. What we don't want is the ambulance service telling someone where the defibrillator is and finding out it's broken or not ready for use. And the app would be beneficial to the maintenance of this. However, There is difficulty in creating a national register. It has its limitations. Some of them is actually getting people to register defibrillators. And there's lots of groups around the country who've done a little bit of work and got loads of people to register defibrillators, and no one does anything with the information thereafter. I went out face to face with a lot of these groups in an ambulance car as a representative of the National Ambulance Service, and I didn't have, geez, that much time. Jeez, relax though. That's great.
That was for the next speaker.
Oh, yeah. So that worked well enough, but when you did over the phone connection with people and tried to get them to register a defibrillator, you started to run into trouble. And in particularly with a lot of the sporting organisations, because no one really knew who was in charge. They were bought some years ago, and people change as a voluntary organisation, which is understood on a regular basis. And it was much, much more difficult. However, they're not the ones that we really need in essence. We want the ones that are most likely to be available and in the populated areas. And I suppose with national media and this kind of a group, I think we could register an awful lot of them. And my best guesstimate, talking to all the guys in the right places, is roughly somewhere between 12 and 15,000 defibrillators in Ireland. Now, I did see something last night, and I wouldn't put my hand on heart to say it was 100% factual, but the Netherlands, from what I read last night, has somewhere between 60 and 80,000 defibrillators. And again, it was a website, but it was meant to be linking in with some paper, but I'm not sure. The limitations for it is time consuming to actually get that information, to get the right information, to input it, to have it in the right places for the right people. So again, it needs to be very much driven by IT, so as much as that can be done. The biggest issue I had running this test version, or a pilot version in the Midlands, was the location. So I'd get a name of a place, a village, I wouldn't even know it myself. And then I had to go and try and find a church in that village where it was hanging off of, so I had to go into Google Maps and start looking for the defibrillator on Google Maps sometimes. Now, some of the postcoding system may help us out with that. That said, and some of it, a lot of the stuff, you know, while we're all enthusiastic, we sometimes look around and we say, you know, how bad are things with 5% success rate? Things aren't really that great. How much can we affect this? I was very lucky to attend the resuscitation conference in Vienna 2 years ago, and it opened my eyes to how far ahead we are. In the EU, some countries, it's not the ambulance service that take the phone call, it's actually the local police force. And they may or may not pass it on to the ambulance, and they may or may not try and hang on to it and see when they get around to it because they're busy doing other things. It may or may not be a control centre that picks up the information. It may then go to other agencies. Some countries still have multiple phone numbers for emergencies. If you head to France, you'll still see why 112 will work across the whole Europe. You'll have 115, 119, 117, and the likes of that. Very few countries have the type of community responders we're talking about right across the country. So we're a small island. We can make some serious achievements and have a national control centre, national responder systems, national activation system with a RAP, a national defib register before most countries around the world. No other country at the moment has a national activation system like the RAP. No other country in the world has a national AD register linked with a control centre. And we are one of only 2 other countries that report on 100% of our cardiac arrests to the OCAR. So we've a lot done, even sometimes it seems like we are really struggling. But if you really compare, and when you compare us with the best, it's a little bit difficult. When you compare us with the average, we are there, we are up there. We just, as I said earlier, need to bring it all together. But we should be quite proud of the amount of work we have and what we've done so far. So, what can we do now? Well, we can be alerted, as a lot of you are here, and that's why you're here. We can respond, so we'll be alerted with the defib app, hopefully. We can respond and we can activate defibrillators if we know where they are through a national registry, and we can collect data. Because you can see some of the other speakers who could speak so fluently about the information and what that drives. We need that. We need to get that information into Siobhan, who will be speaking after me. It's really, really important. So that's what we can do. And as I showed you the slide earlier, this is what it really boils down to, is we can have many different types of responders, many different types of areas. Some will overlap and some won't. But at the end of the day, we're heading in the right direction and we can affect those response times and in turn work on that. And if you look at the Netherlands, it is comparable in regards its surface area of 41,000 square kilometres with Ireland. So if they have that many defibrillators, if it's true, well then we have a lot of work to do, and hopefully that will affect our survival as we go along. And again, Gura Mahaglif.